and a journey where my medical education did not prepare me for at all. So don't blame your docs, because they're well-meaning individuals, but they were not trained to do this, okay? I'm a pediatrician. I thought I knew what I was doing until my son was diagnosed, and I knew nothing. So, different approaches to therapy. All of us are very familiar with the traditional, that's your ABA, speech, OT, very, very important part of the IEP to help our kids along. But of course, the missing link may be biomedical. Some of you may not have heard about this. That's what I want to go over this afternoon. Our kids have medical problems, not psychiatric, not neurologic. Our kids' behavioral and cognitive problems stem from an overall systemic toxicity. And I'll share with that what that means and how we can intervene. If our problem today is genetics, we might as well go home today. Just go home. There's nothing we can do. All the genetics will say there's gene therapies, but no, we're not there yet. So autism is a component of genetics, but that's not the whole story. You have a genetic predisposition, but you have a trigger or several triggers, and that will set you up to have autism. That is the current consensus on the model of the pathophysiology of autism. At least that's on the biomedical MAPS or DAN viewpoint. Not all people see the same way, of course. We're still trying to fight through our colleagues to try get everybody seeing eye to eye. We need to treat our kids as a whole and not as individuals with brain defects or they're born with it. Hello? No, they're not born with it. They were affected by the environment, by the toxins that we put into the world. So we can do something about that. We can't do about genes, but we can do something about what we put in our kids, definitely. In psychological and spiritual aspect is the big gear. It's a key. And a lot of times we're here at church. Well, this is a building, but the interactions between people of God to share and to interact and to share the different successes and the failures, that helps our kids. And that gives us our spiritual support that we so much need to continue this journey. So I really encourage you to get connected. Get connected with church, get connected with TACA, get connected with other groups of advocacy for your kids, because you will learn and you will interact and coordinate with others who are on the same journey. Okay, so autism spectrum disorder results from numerous systemic medical problems interacting in vicious cycles. So I'll explain some of this stuff. Increased damage from toxins, environmental toxins, impurity detoxification. I'm going over as an overview, and I'll go into details what that means. There's oxidative stress. Our kids have so much oxidative stress. What does that mean? Well, we're air-breathing organisms. We breathe oxygen, but we have byproducts of oxygen metabolism. What are those? Free radicals. And these are very highly reactive species that will damage cells. If you don't have detoxification set up in your body to take care of the oxidative stress that our kids have, guess what happens? Our kids become inflamed and central processing goes away. You can't coordinate your thought if you have oxidative stress. You have stress, you probably can't coordinate thought, but I'm talking about oxidative stress. You know, physical stress too, psychological stress, we just zone out. Our kids kind of become introverted, right, inside. Why? They can't deal with the inputs that's bombarding them. So they become internalized to this little stemming behavior, spinning, pacing around. That's what their world, that they can interact. They have a control over that. I believe that that's part of the pathophysiology, why kids stem. And then fungal infections, as Joe says, gut inflammation and food sensitivities, another also viral infections, fungi, because of the shift from Th1 to Th2. I'll go into that, what that means. So overall, all that slide says is nothing has to do really center on the brain. Everything that I've spoken about has to do with the whole body. Your intestines, your nervous system, your endocrine system, your immune system. So all these things will interact. If you have inflammation in all these things, believe me, your brain cannot process information. Okay, so intestinal inflammation, malabsorption. Our kids have bombardment of antibiotic usage throughout their lives, beginning with infancy. Multiple infections, and well-meaning doctors will throw antibiotics at this because a lot of our kids show up at the ER at night, right? Fevers always happen at night, and rushing to the ER happens. And ER docs try to protect their license, will throw antibiotics at anything with a fever, even though it's viral. So you got continual antibiotic usage, sometimes 20 times throughout their life. Their gut is fried. Okay? So good bacteria don't grow. Mercury exposure in infancy, that's amalgam exposure with moms with amalgams with silver fillings, and not silver, I'm sorry, mercury fillings. And they have also seafood exposure, etc. Some IVF babies have a lot of exposure prior to even fertilization, because what happens with in vitro fertilization is that the moms need to prep themselves with a lot of injections, and those injections are loaded with aluminum and other adjuvant solvents. So they're not so good in preparing an embryo. But that's what's happening today. We have, obviously, even the use of oxytocin when they pushing Pitocin, for instance. Even in the induction of labor, there is said to be a link between that. Well, all those are injectables, right? You're using IVs. All injectables have aluminum, all of them. Why? I don't know why, but they say it's an adjuvant. It helps your immune response to be more of a potential. Well, it's a toxin. A toxin does the same thing too. So you see, the manufacturers don't want to reinvent the wheel. They want to spend R&D to get a brand new manufacturing process. Our vaccine process is then antiquated to the 1970s. We're still using that witchcraft in the 70s. We have not improved our manufacturing techniques. Because why? Money. They're making billions on the current way. Why would they change? But our kids are being definitely affected. Okay, our American diet is not so good for our kids. There are vitamins, mineral deficits. We don't have EPAs in our diet. We don't have fish oils, and that's very protected. That's neuroprotective. Remember that. And then carbs, just loaded with carbs. Our kids just Larbs, Fritos, and Lay's, and all that, right? Just carb junkies. Those things sets up inflammation in the gut. Food sensitivity, leaky gut. If you have not a good integrity of the gut, then you introduce that individual to allergies, because you don't have a barrier for the outside world to your bloodstream. So everything comes in, you don't digest it, you don't chop it down right, proteins leak into the bloodstream. It's not supposed to. Peptides are not supposed to be there, but peptides, well, what? Peptides are just slips of protein, okay? These things will induce your immune system to develop allergies. So that's why my kid's allergic to lettuce. Who's allergic to lettuce? Like, food sensitivities comes from leaky gut. So if we take care of our kids' leaky gut, does it mean they can have pizza again when they're teenagers? A lot of the time, yes. But it takes a lot of work, a lot of diligence until the teenage years, where you can say, well, maybe you can be like your friends and have pizza. But like I said, we can heal, but we need time and adherence to a program, right? Dysfunctional enzymes. So like if you don't have the intestinal lining being disrupted, then you don't have the enzymes to help with digestion, and therefore what? You have maldigestion, malnutrition. Sometimes you have that. Opioid, casomorphines, So if you don't have the enzymes to chop up your milk and your gluten, you're left with these molecules that look like morphine. Casomorphines, gliadorphins. One enzyme is quite important. When you buy enzymes, there's this thing called DPP4. You want to have that DPP4 in your enzyme formulation because that's the one that cleaves this molecule. So enzymes with DPP4. So what does the intestines will look like from the poor diet? Well, these villi, which are like finger-like projections into the lumen of your gut that increase surface area for absorption, those villi are gone. It's just lost. And all the villi have just enzymes on there to help digestion. When you don't have that, you lost digestive capacity. Low stomach acid gives you more chance of getting infections because that's your first line of defense when something comes down the hatch. Toxic exposures, stress, oxidative, and emotional. My kid has 48 hours of ABA/regional center for the week. That's more than a full-time job, right? We get burned out by 40 hours. He has 48. Our kids are demanded every which way. There's a lot of emotional stress as well as metabolic stress. I'll talk about the metabolic side. Results are food allergies, malabsorption, with the casomorphines, with the gliadorphins being present. You can test for that, actually. You can test it in the urine to know where if your child has that or not. Dysbiosis, what does that mean? Bugs that shouldn't be there is colonizing the gut. So that's dysbiosis. With yeast, Ethan had a lot of that issues. So is all our kids. Mostly of our kids have yeast problems, viruses, bacteria. And the toxins can build up because you have that intestinal permeability being altered. The gut is under fire. A lot of our kids have these big bellies. Why? Intestines are swollen. Infiltration of white cells, loss of gap junctions, and loss of villi. You have these things called lymphonodular hyperplasia. I'll show you a picture of what that means. It's basically pus patches in the gut, all across the gut. Some GI doctors will call it normal because you can have some amount of this lymphonodular hyperplasia in normal guts as well, but when you have so much of that, you got to call it abnormal. However, a lot of our pediatric gastroenterologists will read that as a normal finding. So what happens even when we refer to a CHOC GI or a CHLA GI, they'll come back in normal. And I know they have something wrong. I know that because it's where you look, and I'll show you what that means. If you don't look in the middle, if you look from top and you look from the bottom, you're not going to find it if you don't look for the right things. Okay, increased cytokines and decreased IL-10s. The IL-10s is another cytokine that controls as a regulatory cytokine. So, and cytokines are one immune cell communicating to another immune cells to get activated. It's kind of like how cells talk to each other. They're hormones for cellular communication, basically, but they're part of the immune system. You have increased cytokines in the gut, in the brain of our kids, and decreased regulation. So what happens is that's just inflammation everywhere. Gut, brain, immune system. If we can wave a magic wand and get rid of inflammation, we'll be done. Our kids will be normal. We're done. But the magic is to control that inflammation. That's the art of it. Trying to find the reasons for your kid's specific inflammatory response and control that. Whether it be due to toxins, due to allergies, whether it be dysbiosis with the yeast, whether it be oxidative stress. The key is to find those. It won't be one, it will be several. And to deal with that individually, then you cut your kid's inflammation down, and the kids become normal. That's biomedical intervention. Persistent infections with measles virus, Andrew Wakefield did studies years ago that has documented vaccine mediated measles virus in the guts of autistic children years after their vaccines has been completed. MMR is a weakened triple viral vaccine. Measles, mumps, rubella. And when is MMR given? 12 months to 15 months of age. A lot of times people say it's just because you have a temporal coincidence. They happen to be at the same time. That's why autism is not related to vaccines. That's the AAP standpoint. But thousands of parents cannot be wrong. We have to listen. The problem with the medical community is that they get so, obnoxious. They only listen among themselves. Okay, I'm an exception, okay? But because autism taught me not to be that way. But seriously, we should not be obnoxious about the concerns of our patients. We should listen to that. You can't blanket yourself like, MMR is not related. But my son turned the wheels over and spin right after the MMR. My son did that. Probably a lot of you may have that similar story. It's a temporal event, but it's so immediate and so much connected, you cannot say there is no link. So don't give live viral vaccines. Unfortunately, today, MMR is only manufactured by Merck, and they have a monopoly. And they will not do individual measles, mumps, rubella. I had that years ago because I wanted to separate it out, but for 5 years, they have not put out that formulation. And what's the reasoning? When I called them, there's no demand. It's crazy, right? There's no money. That's what it is. Crazy. Okay, persistent inflammation, secondary autoimmunity, toxins, and dysbiosis. Okay, so what does it look like? How come my picture did not show up? I'm so sorry. Pictures are worth 1,000 words, but you can't see it. I don't know why it's not transmitting. Anyway, normal colonoscopy, you get a nice pinkish mucosa. Under lymphonodular hyperplasia, basically you have pus patches throughout the gut. It looks like yellow grapes in the gut. Those are not. There's part of it, some of it may be okay, but if you have a lot of that, predominance of that, you gotta call it abnormal. But some GI docs, they just breeze right through that. Okay, so that didn't show up either, but this reflux esophagitis is here. So you do endoscopy, you can see that. Colonoscopy, you can see that. However, that's what a lot of the mistake is made. The pathology happens in the midgut in a lot of our kids, in the small bowel. And previously, we were not able to look in there because you can't have enough of a tube to go look in there, right? It's not long enough. So the pill cam, this is, I'm sorry you can't see this, but believe me, there's small bowel ulceration. you gotta imagine that, okay? Look like punched out lesions in the gut. And this is through a pill cam, so the patient swallows the pill cam and is able to take, 4 images per second, like literally all throughout the gut. And so you can look at the gut function in real time, what the pathology is that was previously an enigma to us until now. So small bowel can be assessed with the pill cam, but you got to have doctors who are willing to do that. So a lot of times the peds GIs don't do that. I had to also go to the adult guy and force him to kind of work on my kid, but my kid's a little bit older. So the younger ones, you probably need to see Krigsman. Krigsman, anybody familiar with that? Art Krigsman? Arthur Krigsman is the pediatric gastroenterologist of our focus group, if we say, because he does just autism, because there's so much pathology in autistic gut. That's all he does. He has office in New York, office in Austin, Texas, and he's extremely busy. His wait list is crazy, but sometimes it's worth that extra pay, because if you're just spinning in a circle with the GI docs here, you may need an expert to kind of work our kids' gut. And our kids have definite pathology in the gut. Okay, so dysbiosis, I talked about this. This is bacteria and fungi and parasites that are not supposed to be there, but it's there. So why? Immune dysfunction from Th1 to Th2 shift. What does that mean? Our immune system has basically two components. Th1 is your cellular immunity, your Pac-Mans, your white cells, and your macrophages. These are Th1s. It goes around and surveys your body for tumors, kills viruses, and a little yeast here zaps it, bacteria, takes care of that. But when you have a shift to Th2s, you have decreased your ability to fight infections, because I just told you that's protective, right? Th2s does antibodies. It kicks out a lot of antibodies. Little Ys, a little antibody like a Ys. Whenever you get exposed, your body just pumps up a bunch of Ys, bunch of antibodies. And when antibodies couples together, it kind of just blows up your histamine, so your kids will have allergic responses, et cetera, et cetera. So you have a lot of antibodies. You can have autoantibodies as well, because you have cross-reactivity. You have lost that self-tolerance because you have just bombarded your system. You have shifted to a humoral response by pumping a bunch of antibodies. You get super allergic to the environment and autoimmune problems. And that's what we see. Our kids have ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease, like illnesses. They don't have the typical Crohn's, but they have Crohn-like. Now, this is pretty significant inflammatory bowel disease in kids. But we're seeing that in our population. Genetically, this disease is not so rampant, but now we're seeing much more. Why? Because autism affects the gut, the nervous system, the immune system. It goes everywhere. Everywhere that have oxidative stress, you can have the problems with these things. So autoimmune problems and hypersensitivity, hyperallergic to the world, i.e. allergic to lettuce. Crazy. Okay, so chronic inflammation, overactive immune response to foreign invader, and inability to auto-regulate, thus resulting in secondary damage to normal tissues and cells. Those are collateral damage. If your immune system is bombarding, and you're going to have collateral damage. That's typical from inflammation, right? You have a scar, your body overcompensates by giving a big scar, scabbing. That's collateral damage. Same thing, you have oxidative stress that's going on in all your cells. You are going to have, once your body try to equilibrate, try to get back to balance, you will have, from inflammation, collateral damage. That's what we're seeing. So, oxidative stress, just in a nutshell, we produce oxygen-free radicals because we breathe air, we breathe oxygen. The metabolism, we have superoxides or oxygen-free radicals. What are these things? They go around and damage your cellular function. It punches holes. I'll show you a slide of what that means. Oh shoot, the slide didn't show up. Too bad. This is not helping me. You guys have to have a very vivid imagination for this kind of thing. How should I explain this thing? Okay. You're making it hard on me, this thing. It's okay. Okay, so what is glutathione? How should I explain? Glutathione is your universal trash truck of the body. It goes around and collects your trash. Okay, you have toxins, you have metals, you ingested some cyanide. I'm just saying, like, literally, right? Lead. Lead is in some of our food, even in the clay pots, etc. Ingested. What happens? Our body needs to detoxify that. Even we have atmospheric mercury. Mercury is supposed to be out of our vaccines, but we breathe from the soot, from the airplanes, from the smog. There's mercury, there's metals in the air, atmospheric mercury, and lead, and aluminum, all that. Not tremendous amounts, but you can go to the EPA website and find out what your particular area of particulates are in your area. You can definitely find out. And these things our kids breathe every day. And without trash truck to clear them, what happens? Things build up. It blocks up chemistry. You can't function as well when you have trash in the body. Basically, oxidative stress. Then you can't deal with the, functions, cellular functions, methylation. These are big terms, but like for instance, you can't activate a protein. You can't, synthesize a certain biologic function. You express a certain gene. Those become compromised when you have cellular damage. Now, these damage is on every cell of the body because oxidative stress goes everywhere. And thereby, you have multi-system involvement. Like I said, it's a systemic medical problem. It is not a neurologic specific disease because of oxidative stress. And I can't show you that because it didn't show up, but Dr. Jill James did studies on this many, many years already that shows a difference in our children, autistic children, and neurotypical controls. There's definitely a difference in the capacity to detoxify. It's called a redox potential. In a nutshell, you take the active glutathione and you neutralize certain toxins. You tie that up. You became a oxidized glutathione. So you used up that reduced glutathione to be oxidized glutathione. So if you buy something, you want to buy reduced glutathione. So you just know if you want to go and buy some liposomal glutathione, make sure it's reduced. Nobody will sell you oxidized because there would be malpractice involved. But reduced glutathione is the active form. Okay? Our kids have very low reduced glutathione and very high oxidized, all used up glutathione. So their ability to detoxify is reversed compared to our neurotypicals who have high amounts of reduced and low amounts of oxidized. Different ratio. You know, the surprising thing is the moms have the same thing. Jill James proved that actually in a nice, and for that matter, why methyl B12 helps the moms as well. So you can get more bang for your buck. 2 patients for 1. Increased oxidative stress. It does to all tissues, so gut as well. Degeneration of gut epithelium and intestinal inflammation. The intestine is actually swollen. That's why your kids' bellies may be out here. Increased intestinal permeability as total autoimmune problems. CSF cytokines is 232 times compared to control. That is huge. What are the cytokines? I told you that inflammatory hormones. So they originate from the gut. And mainly from gut and inflammation in the gut. Because they've proven that it's not the CSF origin. I'll get into why that is later. Okay, so oxidative stress also affects your immune function, right? Because oxidative stress is all cells, right? It's also in immune cells. Your T cells don't work well. Your NK cell, natural killer cell don't well. So what? You have infections. Infections that are not supposed to be there. Weird infections. Sometimes you look at this lab and without knowing the patient, a doctor will pick up a lab and say, this person had HIV. Because our kids have a relative immunodeficiency. And therefore, weird infections will appear. Blastocystis hominis is a parasite that typically affects HIV patients, but routinely seen in our patients as well. Exaggerated humoral response, antibiotic response, I talked about that, and leading to dysbiosis, hypersensitivity, autoimmunity, and that affects GI nervous and as well as detoxification systems. So oxidative stress again also goes to the brain, right? Because this is all cells. Dr. Diana Vargas in 2005 published this landmark study, which is somewhat instrumental in helping us see what's really going on in our autistic brains. So these children die from drowning, so unrelated, right, to the primary cause of autism. and their brains were sectioned and compared to neurotypical, and it was seen that there's glial activation. What does that mean? Your glial cells in your brain are supposed to be your blood-brain barrier, your nurturing cells that keeps blood from brain. There's this thing that protects your brain from the rest of the body. It's called blood-brain barrier. Very important. You don't want the brain to see while your rest of the body sees, because your brain is very, very important. So God designed us to have the blood-brain barrier. Now, with inflammation, you have lost that. Your glial cells is now activated. Your glial cell lines that blood-brain barrier. It's supposed to be a nurturing molecule. It's supposed to take nutrients and feed your neurons. It's your mommy, right? But your mommy now become ninjas and start doing damage, because neuroglial activation is from the CSF cytokines. And CSF, I already told you, 232 times of normals. And without the presence of lymphocytes, that means there are no infection going on in the brain. The kid doesn't have meningitis. If your kid has meningitis, it will have those lymphocytes. No lymphocytes, cytokines, and the glial activations. Glial activation means you have effectively says, no more. Activated. When you have glial activation, basically your neurons don't really communicate with each other. They're firing randomly, spontaneously, almost. What happens when you have an orchestra without a conductor? You have noise. Basically, our kids are functioning without a conductor. It's just firing everywhere. Hyper, disruptive, distractible. Glial has been activated so that you have inflammatory fluff that cuts away all central processing. Not all, but it just shuts down your central processing. That's our kids. Central processing disorder. Increased TNF gamma in ASD, CSF, that's also another paper. TNF is tumor necrosis factor. That's also seen in Alzheimer's. So we can see we can deduct from Alzheimer's research that some of the medication used to decrease inflammation in Alzheimer's can be helpful in autism. And that's sort of like proof diagnostic by therapeutics, if you will, right? Sort of reverse it. Because unfortunately, not enough money is invested in our kids' research. But lots of money in Alzheimer's, so we have to learn from them too. So they have similar pathophysiology, so we can deduce something to help our kids as well. Elevated inflammatory cytokines, these are all there. I just listed them. I told you they're very much elevated in the brain, and obviously that creates the fluff where you lost that communication, the coordination of the thought. Cerebral hypoperfusion, hypoxia due to vasculitis, that's actually been proven by Ann Connolly's lab, and they have isolated antibodies that attack the endothelial cell, which means the lining of the vessels of the brain. There's antibodies to attack those cells that line the vessels of the brain. So what happens with that? The vessels became inflamed. Vasculitis. When you have itis, infection or inflammation. When you have that, decreased perfusion. Hypoxia. Low functioning. Maybe that's why hyperbarics works. Increased perfusion, increased oxygenation. Decreased total antioxidant capacity as well. Cytokine effects. Jeez, that's gone too. What was that? We'll skip that. Okay, so toxins and metals toxicity. Our food source, because of driven by money, is heavily herbicide and pesticides all over the place. And really, I think the major culprit, I think, is this. The industrial chemicals, which unfortunately we don't have too much control over that. because our legislators really don't see eye to eye about what we are really putting on our environment. The exposures, I quoted some of these things from Texas, San Francisco, Louisiana, to just kind of give you a background. They actually did studies where they took different toxicology from different counties in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I correlated with, the fish mercury contents in the different areas of the bay. And it correlated very much with the autism rates of those counties. The higher the rates, mercury content in the fish, the higher rates of autism in that county. Same thing in Texas. They did environmental, I think that was a herbicide study in Texas where they heavily sprayed the fields. Very much correlated with the amount of autism in those counties. The rates of autism correlated to the amount of toxins in that county. If you take a map of different counties with different elevated rates, and you took a same map of autism rates, it almost matches. Just shows toxic exposure gives you neurologic derangements. That's without question. However, we just need to hopefully be advocates for our kids that we can change some of our policy, because we're poisoning our next generation. We're going to bankrupt this country quickly. Lead exposures, of course, we already mentioned some. It's come from some of the pots that are sort of from foreign countries and have been lead infused in some of the paints. So, and also the toys, got to be very careful. Our kids like to lick, so you really need to kind of pay close attention. Your manufacturing from the toy manufacturers, you need to check. I don't know, some of the stuff coming from China is pretty terrible, so gotta be careful about that. Aluminum, it's still in our vaccines. Mercury's out since 2002, thank God, but we still have aluminum, and it's traced in our vaccines. The 3 R's: remove, replenish, and repair. So the gist of everything that we do is to give our kids what our kids need to have and remove what our kids ought not to have. That's the gist of what we're doing. And our kids will find a way to repair. If you give the body an answer, a way out, because our kids stuck. Another physician coined it as a biochemical train wreck. We're stuck somewhere. Biochemically, metabolically. If you let them have a way out, they will find equilibrium and have a way. Neuroplasticity, we used to think, okay, the way our brain can remodel itself and find new connections, neuroplasticity thought was gone after 5 years of age. No, definitely not true. I encourage you to never give up and always keep going, because neuroplasticity goes on well into even adulthood. You can affect a change even later on. So I just want you to know we need to find that equilibrium again, and the body can repair itself. So remove, what do you mean? Remove junk, sugars, junk foods, carbs, preservatives, all that stuff that's in our food source that our kids should not have. GFCF diet helps in certain individuals. I don't want people to be locked into a certain diet. You can, if you want to try something, you can try something. Gluten-free takes 3 months to be strict diet to say it does or does not work. So people say, yeah, I tried it. Well, did you try for 3 months? Were you strict? Those are very important questions to assess whether that diet was good or not. We can't adequately comment about that until we really give it a try for that length of time. Okay, and then, of course, bacteria, you got to eliminate. Certain bacteria causes pandas. I don't know if you guys know about that. Strep causes, this is called pediatric autoimmune neuropsychiatric disease associated with strep. These kids have a lot of OCD, repetitive behaviors, tics, and that's due to strep toxins and antibodies that goes to the brain, that tells the basal ganglia to kind of go through repetitive thoughts. and emotional emotional repetitive motion as well. Clostridia is a bacteria that causes the toxins of them causes aggression. So some of our kids who are biters, everything, you treat that Clostridia, they become nice again. It's very interesting how bacteria can affect behavior, and strep affect behavior, of course. Fungi affect behavior. Ms. Walden will call me. I already know Ethan is overloaded. He's yeast overgrowth. She knows. She's been through it. She knows what to look for. And sometimes you need tune-ups. Our kids goes like this, right? When they become more giddy or like hyperactive or just, like having these wanting pressure and just wanting to climb. These are some of the manifestations of yeast. And she's pretty well with that. You will get to know how your kid is if you are looking for these things. If you never look and never ask, you will never know, right? But I think we as parents, we need to be our advocates, our kids' advocates, and we need to find out. Because most people don't know. You know your kid the most, and you should know. You should know what your kid's allergic to. You should know what makes him bananas. I mean, every parent will tell me, like, one person will be like, glutamate makes him go up the wall. But then another patient comes up to me, glutamate is the best blessing I ever had. So don't take advice from another person and then do that. You need to know your child and know your child from inside out. Do the testing if you can. That's how you know objectively, and not using anecdotal data or from some person's good success story. That's kind of the take home. The parasites is also there. Bacillus hominis that usually should not be there. That's an HIV bacteria, but that can cause a lot of these grinding behavior, teeth grinding, biting. Artificial dyes, artificial food colorings, obviously bad. Cook from scratch, cook organic, avoid GMOs. Basic common sense. But it goes so far-reaching. Make you think that this is so common knowledge, but this affects your kid long-term. So remove what? Fungi, yeast, because it makes these kids look like drunken sailors. What does yeast do? Ferment and create alcohol. A lot of kids look like drunken sailors, don't they? So you can tell some of that, and sometimes they smell like it. They smell like a brewery. Be like, okay, maybe you're yeasty. Maybe you need some antifungals. And some of these are SDD, specific carbohydrate diet is very helpful to kill some of the yeast because you're starving them. You don't give them the carbs. You give 0 carbs. You starve the yeast out. Body ecology diets are helpful. Probiotics. S. boulardii is a probiotic of yeast against yeast, so that can be considered. Herbals are well tolerated, but it tastes nasty, so you got to consider how to implement that in certain individuals. But it has a very high tolerance profile. That means side effects are low with that. So I kind of like those for that. I try to stay away from a lot of antifungals, but sometimes you need them, and I gave you those drugs there. You need a doc for those. But why is it called Antifungal Parade? Dr. Sidney Baker is the founder of Autism Research Institute, one of the founders, and that's his pet peeve, Antifungal Parade. He parade everything through until something sticks. Because sometimes it doesn't grow. You don't have a culture to help you out. These bacteria, these fungi grow so well in our kids, but you take them out in a petri dish, it doesn't grow. So you kind of need to use empiric data and just parade through it and see what is most effective, right? Watch off of die-off reactions. When the yeast get killed, it releases all the toxins all at once. You get a more autistic trait about 2 weeks into therapy, usually. You can get charcoal for that to help, neutralize some of that effect, and it may be helpful. Biofilms, I'll just really briefly, biofilms are lattices that bacteria form in the gut. They look like mucin plugs. What happens with that is they're just trying to form little fortresses to prevent the immunologic recognition they will be unseen by your immune system, and therefore they persist. Biofilms are hard to get rid of, but you're interested, I recommend Dr. Usman's lectures. Anju Usman. Remove viruses, cold sores, you see a lot of these, and then molluscum. Molluscum, little pearly things that like to grow in a lot of our kids. Pearly little lesions and warts. So that indicates viral overgrowth. Treatments, I listed them there. I try not to use the Valtrex and cyclovirs because they have some liver ramifications. You got to follow liver enzymes. But the other ones are easy to use. Of course, I don't like the MMR, of course. And I don't recommend boosters for them because usually they come to see me after they got the first one, and the 4 or 5 year olds, I tell the parents, just tell the peds no. Just no. Regression is possible with live viral vaccine, which is the MMR, measles, mumps, rubella, typically given by the 1st year and the 4th year of life. And so I recommend to skip that. Constipation, I have a nice picture of the gut that you can't see, but anyway, it's an x-ray with full poop. So you didn't miss much there. It's, yeah, remove constipation. So some of these things, aloe vera is really gentle on this, kind of helps lubricate and move things along. Vitamin C, bulking agent, soluble fiber. Magnesium helps the gut move, and it's quite calming to the system. So you can put the kid on mag citrate or mom, milk of magnesia. Epsom salt bath has magnesium. Sometimes the kids take a bath and swallow a few gulps, and actually their constipation gets better. So Miralax is basically given sugars to draw water. So like polycystin glycols, are little beads of sugars, basically. It draws water to the gut, hydrates the gut, so it moves. Mineral oil, lube the system, so bulk comes out. And if you have rocks, you need to use fleets. So you kind of pull from below and soften from above. Our kids are dealing with this. This is almost 90%. Some kids are frequent goers. They're diarrhea or loose stools, but lots of kids are constipated. They're just stuck, right? That's due to the gut pathology that I already mentioned, right? But the primary cause is all the things, but then you need to alleviate their obstructions as well. Okay, so the replenish part, I don't need to bore you with all these things. Basically, take home is, let's give a whole complement of stuff. These are water-soluble vitamins. So if you give too much, except vitamin A, I'm sorry, and E. No, I'm sorry, and D too, sorry. So for the most part, C and the Bs are good. So they're water-soluble, and even if you get too much, our kids will pee it out. B12 is make sure urine is kind of magenta. Don't be alarmed. And even if you have higher, the peds gets this all the time. Let me do a B12 level. Your B12 level is toxic. There is no B12 level that's toxic, okay? It's over the range, but nothing will happen from that. Your kidneys can easily pee that out. And guess what happened to the kid? More focused, more able to concentrate, complete the work. Words come out. I don't care if the pee's urine. I mean, it's pink. I want the words to come out. Right? Don't you want that? All right. Replenish also minerals. So zinc, magnesium, obviously very important for enzymatic reaction of the body. Lots and lots of reactions depend on them. So that's why zinc and magnesium. Calcium, those are very important minerals. So the take home is not to be concentrated on certain ones. Oh, my kid has, grinding teeth, so let me try calcium. That's not the take home. The take home is there are some certain problems associated with each deficiency, and our kids can have a combo of all of them. The idea is to replenish, and our kids can pee out what they don't need. So there are formulations available of vitamins and mineral combinations that has pretty good amounts of RDA. So when you read it, the RDA may be 5,000%. Don't be alarmed. You're trying to push the reaction through because our kids don't have the enzymes to make it through. So you give them more substrate to push the reaction. That's what the mechanism of that's about, okay? So find a good supplement that contains all of them, so you don't have to mix and match. That's too hard. Yeah, like the Yaskos is too hard. I can't do that, so I'm not trying to taboo her, but it's too hard. Okay, replenish also enzymes. Our kids are missing enzymes. Our kids, so you provide them with the answer. You give them peptidases, disaccharidases, and lipases. DPP4 is a specific enzyme I told you for the morphine and for the, not for the morphine, for the casomorphine and the gliadorphine. So it chews it up, your milk and your gluten, so that you will not have the morphine-like molecules. So try to find an enzyme that contains DPP4 when you before you purchase it. Probiotics, not all probiotics are created equal, so you try to select something that has good potency, greater than 25 billion CFUs, colony forming units, and nice to have a good bag of things. So greater than 4 species is probably a good idea. Anti-glutamate things. There's a calming agents, pycnogenol, taurine, GABA, have been tried. Detoxification, glutathione and NAC are trying to help your system do a better job in trash collecting. So you don't have enough trash trucks, I'm going to give you more trash trucks to collect so that you have less toxins remaining to metabolic derangements. 5-HTP is good for mood. It's 5-hydroxytryptophan. L-tryptophan is just another form of that. It converts to serotonin in the body, so it makes you chill out. A lot of our kids are missing serotonin, and that's why they're high fight or flight. They're just like here and here and here. Our kids are on adrenaline. So serotonin is depleted. Serotonin, epinephrine, norepinephrine, jacked up. We need to find equilibrium. Okay, melatonin, good for sleep, anti-inflammatory, it's good antioxidant. So crank up the dose, don't worry, you need your kids to sleep because we need our sleep too, so we need our kids to sleep. And plus, they will function better the next day. Essential fatty acids, omega-3s and 6s, obviously important. CLO, which is cod liver oil, it helps inflammation and antioxidant activity. Amino acids, don't worry too much about those, it doesn't work that much. Carnitine, CoQ10, mito cocktail. You heard about mitochondrial cocktail. A lot of that's involved carnitine and the CoQ10. That's been known for a long time. Our neurology colleagues uses that a lot. But today we don't have a genetic form of mitochondrial disorder. We have a toxin-mediated mitochondrial disorder, which is much, much more common. Because genetically, it's a rare disease. But you hear it all across. Mito disorder. My kid has mito. My kid's on mito cocktail. What does that mean? A lot of times they're on carnitine CoQ10, helping the mitochondria function better. What is the mitochondria? The powerhouse of the cell. It manufactures ATP. Without ATP, all of us will be a pile of noodles on the floor, right? But we need ATP for everyday cellular function, especially your brain. Lots of ATP. Lots of mitochondria in the neurons. If you have mito defects, your neurons don't function very well. It's sluggish. Needs to have some nutrients to kind of bolster that. Okay? Biochemical, other things, methylation support, sulfation support, SLH. Don't worry about the terms. Basically, metabolic, biochemical train wreck, and therefore they need some support with all these things. Those are typically coming from docs anyways. So usually I have to assess that with labs, and then I decide which B12 and DMG folinic acid to introduce. And a lot of them has been very positive. B12 works. Who's on B12? Around the audience. Cool. Should be more of you. Really. She'll make you a believer. Yeah, so B12 works, but sometimes you do kind of do a fishing probe. You're fishing with B12. Is it a bite? Oh, it's a bite. He has a good response. Throw DMG. thrombolytic. You're in the same pathway. You're on focus, you're on concentration, you're on coordinating thought. So those are what B12 focus on methylation. If your fishing probe of B12 works, either elevate it, increase frequency, or introduce adjunctive therapies. That's why talking with parents is key. And this goes to show, people ask me all the time, who gets better? Autism is recoverable, by the way. You guys know that, right? We have Ethan, who's recovered. So we definitely have success stories out there. Is it the norm? It's not typically the norm. I wish it was it, but everybody improves. Everybody. That's definite. Been doing this for a number of years. I say everybody improves, but who gets out depends on the commitment and the diligence from the parents. That is key, number one. Because whatever I do, I'm only there for an hour to give you some advice. She can call me and stuff like that, but she kind of knows stuff already. She already networked enough with people, and she knows Ethan so well that she can adjust every single thing. You see, you need to know your child. You need to know your child inside out. Get the labs to know that. I think it's a crime if we know certain things and we don't do anything about it. If we know our kids have toxins and we don't do anything about it, that's a crime to me as a pediatrician. Because we can't get our kids out. We definitely can get our kids out. Antifungals, antibacterial, antivirals, that's from docs. I already told you why that's necessary. If you have decreased perfusion, decreased oxygenation, obviously under pressure to deliver some oxygen helps. Hyperbarics has been proven to be effective in helping our children. Infrared saunas can sweat out toxins. So that is a detoxification technique. I told you something about the Mito cocktail. That's with the CoQ10 and the carnitines, etc. That's used there. Too busy of a slide. Just a take-home message. You have methylation defects and you have antioxidant defects. That's going on in our kids. This is going on in every cell. This is the biochemical pathway of methionine metabolism. So if you don't have methionine metabolism correct, you don't methylate. And if you don't methylate, just bear with me just for 1 sec. If you don't methylate, you don't activate DNA well, you don't express your genes that well. So what happens? Maybe that's some of the reason why our kids can't focus. Our kids, it's distractible, can't complete a task. Give him methyl B12. She told me, hey, he can complete a task. He can pay attention. He's learning. He's talking. He is out of the woods. Of course, it takes more steps along the way, but we can recover our kids. Antioxidant potentials is low for our kids because that goes to glutathione. You see that methionine goes away to glutathione. If you have derangements on top, you don't have enough glutathione, you don't have trash truck of the body. Give them the answer by giving the cofactors. I told you right here, the methyl B12, zinc, B6, where that works, that will push the reaction down. More glutathione. We need more glutathione. And glutathione is even important in aging. Yeah, it's a big industry that the cosmetics and the beauty industry is pumping money into glutathione because glutathione will help us keep our young, keep our youth. Like a fountain youth, not quite a fountain youth, but you know what I'm talking about. Okay. This is the last slide, I promise. Modulation, the Valtrex, Immunovir, these are some drugs that's there, but you don't have to worry about those. Those are, docs needs to do those things. IVIGs are actually giving antibodies to tie up your cross-reactive antibodies in the body to decrease the inflammatory response. The TNF alpha antagonists, those are Alzheimer drugs that's been helpful for our children that blocks your cytokines. So antagonists, right? You block cytokine response, the inflammation goes down. The Alzheimer patient can remember stuff again. The autistic patient starts speaking again. Okay, HBOT, increased oxygen delivery to tissues, anti-inflammatories, Those are listed there, but the list goes on much longer than that. Those are a little bit older slides, so I don't use Actos anymore, Celebrex. But there are more things with the anti-inflammatory. Big key is decreasing inflammation, right? So much more is known today to decrease that inflammation in even with natural stuff, right? Your acai, your noni juices, all that stuff is to give to give you more antioxidant potential so you can decrease oxidative stress. Secretin oxytocins, it's okay, it doesn't really work, so let's not talk about those. Detoxification, glutathione, NAC, LA helps increasing more clearance for the body. Chelation, if you find metals, I never go after it until I prove it, right? So I have to prove metals in the body by proving it by functional assays instead of whether your child can excrete it or not. So if a lot of doctors assess it through the hair or assess it through the urine or through the blood, that's to say your child can clear it into the bloodstream. But what if your child just keeps it in the brain where the fats are? The metals, mercury has a half-life of 20 years. So once it's in there, it's going to stuck in there. And where does mercury go? It likes to go with fat. 75% fat goes there. It concentrates. Concentrate in the liver, concentrate in your fats. So what if it doesn't mobilize? You try to get their, you draw their blood, you get their urine, you collect hair. What if it's not mobilized in the bloodstream? You won't see it. You will give a false sense of security to the patient. Your child is fine, go home. But if you start assessing how their cells look like under these conditions, under toxic environments, because we're assuming that our kids are under poisoning, so you're saying if a particular molecule is synthesized by the body every day, porphyrin is the molecule that we make every day for our hemoglobin that we need for our red cells. We make that every day. If the porphyrin synthesis is affected by the toxin that's going on in the patient, then the metabolites of that synthesis will be different compared to no toxicity at all. You're following me? So you're looking at the pattern of a child on the porphyrin metabolites, you can deduce what that toxic exposure had been. A functional assay rather than whether the child has it in certain compartments or not. It's very helpful. It's basically looking at cells, how that cellular function is affected by the metals and the toxins. So if the presence is there, I like to send it to France because it's a better, they're the originators of that study. So I send it there and it is quite helpful. And if it's present, I go after them with chelators. They're like forklifts. They bind the metals and the body can excrete it through urine or poop. So those are the drugs that are used in that. So thank you very much. Sorry, went over.